Welcome everyone, and as always thank you for tuning in. You are listening to The Account with a report for day 422 of the war in Ukraine. Today I have updates on the latest Ramstein 11 meeting and again about a Russian night attack using Shahed drones. All other updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, Russia and Belarus, and international developments. Nothing noteworthy was reported from the occupied territories today, so I will be skipping this segment. Before we start the news though, the flashpoints along the front. Kremina. According to unverified reports, Russia is slowly advancing on Bilohorivka, putting pressure on the defenders. Bakhmut. Russia is slowly advancing inside the city by simply razing any building to the ground Ukraine could use for defensive purposes by using artillery. Battles were also fought around Homova and Ivanivske. The Ukrainian military has planted a victory forest in the city of Bakhmut. Avdiivka. Russia has launched heavy attacks on Pervomaiske, however so far without any significant success. Ukrainian defenders repelled Russian attacks around Kamyanka. Vuhledar. Russia has resumed assaults on the city, however without any success so far. Reportedly, Russia is again losing a lot of vehicles and personnel here. And to start the news segment, the updates on the Ramstein 11 meeting. The 11th Ramstein meeting has started today. The meeting today marks the anniversary of the first contact group meeting at Ramstein. During his opening speech, US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin outlined the three key issues to be addressed: air defense, ammunition, and logistics, and praised the Allies' commitment, stating that contact group members have already provided $55 billion in aid to Ukraine. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said at the summit that President Putin made several big mistakes when he invaded Ukraine. The first was to totally underestimate the strength of the Ukrainian armed forces. He thought that he was going to control Ukraine within weeks and take Kyiv within days. Then he totally underestimated NATO allies and our partners in our resolve to support Ukraine. He went on to explain that allies have already sent combat aircraft to Ukraine, such as the MiG-29s, and discussions about other aircraft types are underway. Stoltenberg also stated that he is confident in Ukraine's ability to liberate even more land and outlined two important issues: Ukraine's transition from Soviet-era equipment, standards, doctrines to NATO standards and doctrines, and the full interoperability between Ukrainian forces and NATO forces, to be discussed at the NATO summit in July, to which he personally has invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who accepted the invitation. According to the United Kingdom Secretary of State for Defense Ben Wallace, today's meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group in the Ramstein format indicates that international support for Ukraine is growing. Wallace further called on his fellow defense ministers to accelerate the delivery of military aid packages in a demonstration of continuing international support for Ukraine. Canadian Defense Minister Anita Anand has announced that Canada is providing a new $39 million military aid package for Ukraine. The EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, reported on the EU's support. More than 16,000 Ukrainian military personnel have already been trained in the European Union, and more than €600 million worth of ammunition has been delivered. Meanwhile, Latvia announced it will hand over to Ukraine all Stinger anti-aircraft missile systems from its arsenal, responding to Kyiv's request for more air defense. During the Ramstein meeting, the so-called tank coalition has also met. Germany, Poland and Ukraine have signed an agreement on the creation of a center for the repair of Leopard tanks damaged in battles with the Russian army. The Czech Republic announced it is ready to expand the modernization program of T-72 tanks for Ukraine. The US will begin training the Ukrainian military to operate Abrams tanks in the coming weeks. 31 tanks will be delivered to the Grafenwörth training ground in Germany in late May, after which Ukrainian troops will begin training. The program will last about 10 weeks. According to a statement made by the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin after the meeting, members of the contact group have delivered more than 230 tanks, more than 1,550 armored vehicles and other equipment, and munitions to support more than 9 new armored brigades. He also said that Russia's war against Ukraine is not the result of NATO enlargement, but the cause of it. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, meanwhile, is eagerly waiting for the report by Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov on the meeting results. And now the updates on last night's Shahed attacks on Ukraine. During the night, air raid warnings were issued in several oblasts. Shahed attacks were reported in Kyiv, Poltava, and Vinnytsia oblasts. Damage to civilian infrastructure facilities were reported in Poltava and Vinnytsia oblasts. The General Staff of Ukraine reported 8 out of 10 drones were shot down, while the Air Force later stated 8 out of 12 drones were intercepted. A look at all the minor updates out of Ukraine. Lieutenant General Mykola Oleshchuk, commander of the Air Force of Ukraine, has inspected the combat positions of the recently supplied Patriot air defense systems on one of the fronts. President Volodymyr Zelensky has responded to a petition for life imprisonment for members of the Ukrainian parliament who resorted to corruption during martial law. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. A video of last night's powerful explosion in the Russian city of Belgorod was shared on social media. The video shows how the munition first hits the ground and then explodes after about 20 seconds. As a reminder, the Russian Ministry of Defense reported an aircraft munition from an Su-34 fighter bomber of the Russian Aerospace Forces fell on a street. Russian arms shipments to India have been hindered by the increasing difficulty of finding a payment system that doesn't violate US sanctions, due to which India cannot pay Moscow in dollars. Moreover, Russia will not accept rupees because of the currency's alleged exchange volatility. Consequently, India has failed to make payments exceeding $2 billion to Russia in the past year, leading Russia to pause the delivery of 2 batteries of the S-400 air defense system and credit for about $10 billion worth of spare parts. The spokesman of the Russian president, Dmitry Peskov, stated against the backdrop of the introduction of electronic military draft notices in Russia that there are no plans for a new wave of mobilization. Meanwhile, independent Russian media outlet Doxa reported that military summonses were being handed out to graduate students in a dormitory at Moscow State University. The students were informed to appear at a military enlistment office for events related to military service conscription. According to Russian law, students are supposed to be able to avoid conscription before graduation. A Russian court has arrested Kirilo Budanov, chief of Ukraine's defense intelligence, in absentia in the case of the terrorist attack on the Kerch Bridge and plans to put him on the international wanted list. Budanov commented on the arrest warrant, "You know how long I have been working, and it was sort of embarrassing that there were no decisions on me there. I am pleased. This is a good indicator of our work, and I promise to work even better." Dmitry Peskov, spokesperson of the Russian president, claims that the implementation of a full ban on exports of goods to Russia, as considered by the G7 countries, will bring the global economic crisis closer. According to Russian documents obtained by a European intelligence service in July 2022, Russia developed a strategy to build an anti-war coalition with far-right and far-left German parties, Alternative für Deutschland and Die Linke, to weaken support for Ukraine in Europe. According to a claim made by Evgeny Prigozhin, head of the Wagner PMC, the son of Dmitry Peskov, press secretary of the Russian president, has fought in Ukraine as a mercenary of the PMC. The Lefortovo District Court of Moscow has arrested Bellingcat investigator Christo Grozev in absentia in a case of illegal crossing of the Russian border. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius said that the West must say no to the supply of cluster munitions and phosphorus incendiary shells to Ukraine, which it allegedly requested from its allies. Pistorius also considers it perfectly acceptable for the defense forces of Ukraine to conduct operations on the territory of the Russian Federation in order to stop the invasion. He further stated that now is not the best time for NATO to decide on Ukraine's membership, even though the door is slightly ajar. He made these statements on German television during the Maybrit Illner show. In May, Israel plans to test an air raid warning system designed specifically for Ukraine's needs. The tests will be run in Kyiv. While Ukrainian forces continue to hold Bakhmut, leaked US intelligence reports indicate that the US was warning of a potential Russian encirclement and encouraged Ukrainian troop withdrawals back in January. Further, leaked US intelligence documents show that Ukraine's military intelligence made plans to conduct covert attacks on Russian forces operating in Syria with the help of the Kurds. Kazakhstan has increased its oil exports, bypassing Russia in the first quarter of 2023 in an attempt to reduce its dependency on Russia. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defence. With soft ground conditions across most of Ukraine, severe mud is highly likely slowing operations for both sides in the conflict. However, Russian online outlets are likely exaggerating the overall impact of mud on Ukrainian forces as part of an information operation aimed at raising Russian morale and undermining Ukraine supporters in light of an anticipated Ukrainian counteroffensive. Surface conditions can be expected to improve in the coming weeks. The threat from mines probably continues to be a more important factor in limiting the combatants' off-road maneuver. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. The Kremlin demoted the commander of the Russian Pacific Fleet on April 19th amid an ongoing surprise readiness check that began on April 14th. A prominent Russian mill blogger criticized the Russian military's ineffective use of Russian airborne VDV, naval infantry, and Spetsnaz forces in Ukraine. The Russian State Duma adopted a law on April 20th that grants members of the Donetsk and Luhansk peoples, DNR and LNR, militias, veteran status and could apply to select PMC or other irregular personnel, but fails to explicitly address the status of PMC groups as legal entities. Russian President Vladimir Putin instructed Russian Deputy Prime Minister Marat Khusnulin to resolve issues at the Gukovo checkpoint on the Ukrainian-Russian border during a meeting with government officials on April 19th. Putin's orders indicate that Russia intends to maintain customs checkpoints with the illegally annexed eastern regions out of security concerns. Krasnoyarsk Krai Governor Alexander Rus announced his resignation on April 20th, reportedly in response to an offer from Russian President Vladimir Putin to work at the federal level. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy is concentrating its main efforts on conducting offensive actions in the Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Marinka and Shahtarsk directions. Units of the defense forces of Ukraine repelled about 30 enemy attacks on the indicated areas of the front during the day. The city of Bakhmut remains at the epicenter of hostilities. In the Kupiansk direction, during the day, the enemy made an attempt to improve the tactical position, carried out assault actions near the settlement of Liman Pershi without success. The enemy did not carry out any offensive operations in the Liman direction today. In the Bakhmut direction, the enemy continues to conduct offensive actions. Fierce battles for the city of Bakhmut continue. The enemy conducted an unsuccessful offensive near the settlement of Budanivka. In the Avdiivka direction, the enemy carried out offensive actions in the Novokalinove, Stepove and Nevelske districts of the Donetsk Oblast without success. In the Marinka direction during the day, our defenders repelled numerous enemy attacks in the area of the Marinka settlement. In the Shahtarske direction during the day, the enemy carried out unsuccessful offensive actions in the area of Vuhledar. The enemy continues to conduct defensive operations in the Zaporizhia and Kherson directions. Recently, a unit of the occupiers numbering about 300 people, from among convicts, arrived in the temporarily occupied Skadovsk in the Kherson Oblast, allegedly to ensure law and order. Rumors are spreading among the occupiers about a quick end to hostilities with territorial concessions in favor of the Russian Federation, probably to raise the spirits of the invaders. At the same time, it is known that some combat units, which were previously located in the city, are gradually being withdrawn from the settlement to the temporarily occupied territory of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. And that wraps up today's report. If you're interested in any of the details to any article I mentioned, you can find links to them in the description as usual. If you enjoyed the report and found it informative, please consider sharing it with others and giving me a like. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini.